Distinct lack of dog in these personality intros. We couldn't quite get her to come out here because she's very lazy. So instead what I'm going to do is look under some rocks to find a snake friend. I hate snakes. 6 Mortal Kombat games released on the PlayStation. After PC, that's more than any other format, including the arcade where the series was born. But when we look back without the standard rose-tinted specs on, it all looks a bit grubby. The PS1 should be like a second home for the franchise, but is instead pretty much a crack den. Well, maybe a crack den with a nice kitchen at least. Over 5 years, from 1995 to Space Year 2000, Midway tried and tried again to get a Mortal Kombat game on the PlayStation that did the series justice. It was riding high on Mortal Mania, I guess, when Sony jumped into the console market, and the opportunity was there to take things to the next level. The Mortal Kombats on SNES and Mega Drive, and I guess 32X if you have to, were good, but they weren't that fabled arcade perfect we all wanted. The PlayStation could handle it. The PlayStation could bring combat home in flawless form. The PlayStation, for a number of reasons both down to technology and other things, failed. But that's skipping ahead because in 1995 Sony snagged the 32-bit exclusivity for Mortal Kombat 3, a timed deal that would see the PlayStation the only place to get an arcade perfect-ish version of the game in the home, at least until early 1996. Developed by Midway itself, well, Williams, with Sony backing the team up, MK3 on PlayStation was good? Yeah, good. Basic, one would argue, but put next to the SNES and Mega Drive versions, it stood out. Okay, so it had loading times measured in eons rather than seconds, and Shang Tsung's morph ability included its own little bonus extra loading time. But really, aside from its lacking additional features and those loading times, the only thing holding Mortal Kombat 3 back on the PlayStation was that the game itself had lost its way of might, resulting in a diluted experience for fans of the series. Nevertheless, the PlayStation's MK3 stood tall as a sign of arcade perfect-ish things to come. After Mortal Kombat 3 had laid some decent groundwork, it was no surprise to see follow-up Mortal Kombat 2 launch. Except it was a surprise because unless schools in the north of England are as bad as southerners really want to think they are, I'm pretty sure 3 comes after 2? Not on the PlayStation, apparently. Probe Software had ported MK2 to PS1, you see, but because Sony wanted the newest and bestest for its new console, it refused to publish the port and opted instead to lay down $12 million for the MK3 exclusivity. Never once to pass up on opportunistic nonsense, Acclaim stepped forward to pick up the slack, releasing Mortal Kombat 2 on PlayStation, but only in Japan, over 3 years after it had originally released in arcades, about 2 years since it had originally launched on home consoles, and 2 months after Mortal Kombat 3 had released in Japan. I do sometimes wonder how Acclaim lasted as long as it did. There's nothing Japanesey about anything in Mortal Kombat 2 on PlayStation. No language, written or spoken, no credits, nothing. It was just thrown out in the one territory anyone could be bothered doing it in, though it did at least have the wonderful subtitle Ultimate Godly Fist. And hey, it looked the part with big-ass chunky sprites leaping about the screen in a fantastic impression of the arcade original, much better than any previous console release had looked. No, I'm sticking with the looks there because MK2 PS1 managed to run like a dog. Fatalities went from being a quick fun blow-off at the end of a match to a stuttering mess. Let's have a quick comparison between console versions here for Scorpion's toasty variety of finisher.
Toasty! Toasty!
That was pathetic.
And Shang Tsung's morphing ability led to joke situations in which mirror matches, well, just look. The AI was a car crash. You could win the entire game just by spamming fireballs or sweeps. And while visually it did the job, in the audio stakes it did not. None of your CD quality music tracks here on this, a CD based console, no siree. It was all played using the system's sound processing unit, so the music was not great. overlapping sound and voice effects, missing effects, all sorts of little bits and pieces popped up or didn't as the case may be, resulting in a thoroughly basic, unimpressive finished product. You can see why Sony couldn't be bothered releasing the game itself, and why it ended up being shunted off to Japan as a regional exclusive over there. When a game on your brand new console doesn't play as well as the SNES version, which it didn't, when it doesn't play as well as the slightly worse than the SNES Mega Drive version, which it didn't, when it doesn't play as well as the Game Gear version, okay, that's a lie, it played better than that, but the point is, really it wasn't something Sony wanted to shout about. It managed to get a little bit better at least, before the rot really started to show. When Mortal Kombat Trilogy was announced, Teen Bransfield, nature's most awkward adolescent, was in heaven. Everything from Mortal Kombat to that point would be included. Well, all the characters, there were some levels and music tracks and other nonsense missing, but the characters, that's what mattered. They'd be there. And, get this, after half a decade of waiting, after all the rumours, all the April Fool's japes, all the playground lies, it turned out that you would finally be able, in real life, when playing Mortal Kombat Trilogy, you should be Goro. If you're not aware of how important that was to MK fans of the 90s, I'll try to put it into modern terms. It's like being able to play as the bus in Fortnite. So yeah, MK Trilogy released in October of 1996, mere months after MK2 had launched in Japan, though that region wouldn't get Trilogy till 1998 anyway, and I was happy. It was everything I ever wanted rolled into one. The original Pit returned, you could play as previous and current versions of Raiden, and Jax, Kung Lao and Kano, but mainly Raiden, and if you put cheats on, all the fatalities were one button press, so when you ended up making videos of the game 24 years later, you didn't have to look things up on GameFAQs and fail repeatedly. It was a true greatest hits package for the series, and a fine apology for Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 not making its way to PlayStation. Mortal Kombat Trilogy also wasn't very good. I loved it, I really did, and I still have such a powerful nostalgic fondness for it, almost as strong as for MK2 on SNES or the original MK on Amiga. But objectively speaking, Trilogy was not a good game. It wasn't bad, it wasn't utterly broken, that was still to come, but it was mediocre. Clumsily fudged together, there was little effort made to make the whole thing mesh. Unbalanced and unfair, with the playable boss characters, like Goro, being way overpowered, and computer opponents with apparent psychic abilities in place to force you to cheese your entire way through things. It was also riddled with endless bloody loading screens, and again, those Shang Tsung limitations that came with CD-based games of the era. I loved Mortal Kombat Trilogy, but come on, it just wasn't anything more than a cash grab. Honestly, a cash grab would have been preferable to what came next though. Mortal Kombat Mythologies Sub-Zero. This would be the first spin-off for MK, diving deep into the lore of the series and following our favourite frosty bastard Baron Von Cold, aka Sub-Zero, as he clunkily plodded from left to right, or even right to left, what with this being cutting-edge gaming and all, on a slow, jerky quest to try and figure out what was going to suddenly kill him next. When people talk about games being harder in the past, they mean because of things like this. They aren't specifically on about mythologies because nobody wants to remember it happened, but the gist of it is the same. It's not hard, it's patently, absolutely, completely and utterly unfair. As well as shit. I don't know what happened here. Midway itself made the game. John Tobias, one of Mortal Kombat's creators, was heavily involved in Mythologies. It wasn't rushed, it was in development for over a year, a decent amount of time for the PlayStation era. It was a good idea to flesh out the mythos behind the MK characters. Mixing things up by taking it away from being a one-on-one fighting game was the right move because people were officially getting a bit bored of the same old approach the series offered up. There was honestly, genuinely a lot of positives behind Sub-Zero's solo jaunt. Something, whatever it was, just went horribly wrong, and the result was one of the worst Mortal Kombat games ever made, and one of the PlayStation's worst games overall. One thing I will point out here is reading up on mythologies reminded me of just how much Wikipedia leverages video game reviews from the States, as if the rest of the world doesn't have opinions. See, while the cowards and bootlickers at GamePro and its ilk were doling out the solid to high marks, we in the UK had the now long forgotten PlayStation Power handing out a whopping 3% to the Chili Ninja Gits adventure. And you know what? I agree with them, I really do. And even then, it still wasn't the low point for Mortal Kombat on the PlayStation. But first, a detour via the series' abandonment of digitised real people and its entry into the world of 3D graphics, as well as a detour via opinions that will likely make a certain cross-section of you people spit frothy rage in this general direction. It was Mortal Kombat 4 time, and Mortal Kombat 4, while not the world's worst thing, certainly wasn't what I would consider very good. Come on, look at it, even in 1998. It might have been a different kettle of gore to the depth-riddled 3D fighters of the day, but it's still worth the comparison. Virtua Fighter 3 TB and Tekken 3 were already out when MK4 launched in arcades. It was a bad joke in comparison. But, it wasn't a bad game. That's not what I'm saying. It was a necessary step and did a lot right with a series that was, at this point, floundering, and kudos has to go to Eurocom for managing to put out an arcade to PlayStation port that did the coin-up original justice. Pared down a bit graphically it might have been, but it's not like it had to pause to load in special moves or anything. That would of course be ridiculous. It still paused on fatalities, I should point out, but you can't have everything. Basically, MK4 was pacey and reintroduced some of that dark silliness lost in the many guises of the third game, and it could be fun. On balance though, it wasn't all that great, and when we look back now, it's the game in the main series that is so often ignored, forgotten about, or outright slated. And you can see why. Minimal depth, a clunky, rather generic look, it certainly didn't stand out like Combat had previously or would again, instead just blending in with the other 3D fighters of the day. It was a mediocre game at its core, but at least it wasn't riddled with Shang Tsung morph problems. The simple way around that was to not have him in the game and make it so Shinnok, his effective replacement, just copied movesets rather than actually changing into the person in question. Work smart, not hard. What else? 3D's aged, the roster was imperfect, you could be Goro again. I'm just delaying the inevitable. Might as well get to it, has to be done. By this point, Mortal Kombat on the PlayStation had never been better than quite good, sometimes with caveats. So we'd have to do something utterly spectacular to wrench the series up into the higher echelons of the console's library. In Space Year 2000, it certainly did something utterly spectacular, but for all the wrong reasons. Mortal Kombat Special Forces was, as far as I can tell, a project aimed solely at scaring people away from the PS1 and pushing them into the welcoming arms of the PS2, which was only a few months away at the time of the game's release. It had to be that because I can think of no other explanation for it existing. This was the PlayStation's sole Mortal Kombat exclusive, which has to be embarrassing for quite a few people involved. It was intended for release on other formats, but the game's performance on PS1 was so inept, it was dropped. In fact, the series as a whole took a step back for everything to be re-evaluated and reworked, all thanks to Special Forces being so utterly bereft of redeeming qualities. I want to talk more about things around the game rather than the game itself, because doing the latter means I have to remember playing it, and that brings about some form of PTSD, I think. Because it wasn't just that Special Forces was bad, and believe me it was so bad it's bad rather than redeemable in any way. You couldn't even laugh at it for having insta-death sections like Mythologies did. It was just wet garbage left outside in the heat for a few days to really get stewing. It wasn't just that. It was that Special Forces was also ugly, awkward to control, and the biggest sin of all, utterly, completely, totally boring. Throughout this top-downish so-called game of mild exploration and awful fighting, there was not one occasion in which anything of real note happened. Nothing exciting. Nothing even pretending it could be fun. I already called MK Trilogy a cash grab, so I really am at a loss as to what Special Forces should be called. A Giga cash grab? An Ultra grab? A massive turd dropped all over the keen upward staring faces of series fans? An abomination? Those almost do it justice, I guess. We didn't see another Mortal Kombat game on a Sony format until Deadly Alliance at the end of 2002, and we never saw another one on the PS1. Special Forces was the killing blow, the ultimate slap in the face, the fatality for Mortal Kombat in this generation. It certainly was a spectacular way to end things. But really, this is a snapshot in time, a point where Mortal Kombat grew too fast without focused enough stewardship, pushed forward on a wave of ever-increasing avarice from those holding the purse strings. Mortal Kombat didn't stink up the joint from 1995 to Space Year 2000 because it was on the PlayStation. It stank up the joint because it stank. It just so happened these two things, the format most games were released on and the drop in quality for the series, came at the same time and lasted about the length of this specific console's generation. I've grown away from Mortal Kombat over the years. I remember writing a thing about just that for the site you all love, and it made plenty of people cry salty tears. All the same, I'm glad it came back from the horrors of the PlayStation generation, even if I just don't want to play it anymore. I'll stick with MAME and MK2. Cheers. That's your video. Bye!